J.R.R. Tolkien was the greatest epic fantasy author of our time, but his book, The Fellowship of the Ring, almost never existed. If it wasn't for one person, Tolkien's masterpiece might have remained an unfinished manuscript. Stick around to hear about the hidden parallels, the unique differences, and the incredible story behind the book and the movie adaptation of this beloved tale. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Welcome, my lords, to the White City, where you will learn more about Middle-earth and discover differences and similarities between the Rings of Power show and Tolkien's books, and whether Amazon's show, episode by episode, is worth watching. I'm Philip Dutt, your host, and I'll be joined by Matt Vandevort and Mark Schaefer. I hope you enjoy. During this intermission between Season 2 and Season 3 of The Rings of Power, we'll be talking about characters of Middle-earth and artifacts of Middle-earth, along with Lord of the Rings films and Tolkien's life and worldview. To find our Season 1 review, go to the beginning of the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and you'll find it there. And then our Season 2 review can be found by simply searching Season 2 review on YouTube or a podcast platform. And there'll be a good amount of guests who have Tolkien and lore expertise. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the White City Podcast. Today I have back with me Matt Vandevort. How's it going, Matt?
Hello. It's going all right. How are you?
Good. So we're going to be talking about the Fellowship of the Ring, kind of movie more than just the book, but drawing some parallels and looking into some worldview similarities too. And yeah, so just to start off about I think it's interesting to talk about Tolkien's writing of the Lord of the Rings and how long that took. And yeah, I know something that really strikes me is just all the different editions and all the different times he went through editing things just to get it perfect. How about you, Matt? You have anything on that?
I mean, I think that if he wasn't asked to write it by an editor, we wouldn't have it because Tolkien, as you see with the Silmarillion, he was editing that thing and rewriting it basically up until the day he died because he's the kind of person, he was very much a perfectionist in the realm of his writing. So, I know one of my favorite pieces of trivia about it is that when the Two Towers title, he hated it because he basically was forced to pick a title because they were going to print, and he just he called it the Two Towers, but it's like you read it and it's like, which two towers is it? Like, it's probably Orthanc and um
Barad-dûr?
the no, not Barad-dûr. It's the one that Sam and Frodo go through, where Sam at the beginning of Return of the King, Sam
Oh,
and I cannot remember the name off the top of my head.
Kirith.
Cirith Ungol. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's probably those two, but
Huh.
it's like it's like, is it Orthanc and Cirith Ungol? Is it Minas Tirith and Minas Morgul? Is it Orthanc and Minas Morgul? Is it Orthanc and Barad-dûr? I don't know. So yeah, he called it the Two Towers, but he was never sure. He hated that title so much, and so um yeah, with the again, he didn't set out to write Lord of the Rings, and I think that's part of why Lord of the Rings is so interesting as a book, is because it's the only thing that Tolkien wrote really at the request of someone else, because the Silmarillion was all the stories he'd been coming up with basically his entire life. The Hobbit was a story that he had like started out just writing on the back of a student's paper because it just kind of came to him. And then The Hobbit was released and it was really popular. And his publisher for like 20 years was like, please give us a sequel. And then he decided, you know what the natural progression of children's book is? Epic fantasy mythology story. And that's how The Lord of the Rings happened.
Yes. Uh,
Yeah, like so it's really funny. So like one of the other interesting things is that when he wrote the books, he went back and edited The Hobbit. So he edited specifically the story of the finding of the ring because he in the initial story, like in the original version, Gollum does freely give Bilbo the ring and as like his birthday present or something like that.
really?
And yes, so if you go in and read the introduction to The Lord of the Rings, you have this like note on editions, basically, something like that, where it basically talks about how the original published version of The Hobbit is the story that Bilbo told everybody how he got the ring. Um, and it was only through a long conversation that Gandalf figured out and got him to admit what actually happened, which is what's in the modern editions of The Hobbit. So, um,
Wow.
incredibly, he managed to canonize and in world explain why there's two completely different versions of the story. And I think he was working on revisions to The Hobbit. I believe when he died, I read somewhere. This has been years, and so I don't have a source on this. But and he was gonna do things like I think he was gonna have Legolas show up briefly, like basically as a background character, because if the movies didn't do a lot right, but I do think that Legolas should have been there. It'd be really weird if the king's son just didn't show up. And I mean, we all know that he was planning on putting a love triangle between Legolas and this other elf and a dwarf in there. Like, clearly that was part of Tolkien's vision. Uh,
Yes.
yeah. Anyways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's well, because too, like, wasn't Tolkien originally wanting the Lord of the Rings to be one book?
Well, I mean, it is one book.
Well, okay, sure. I
It's it's I'm trying to be snarky and pull up
uh,
my all-in-one copy, but I don't know where it is.
mm,
Uh, but it is like the Lord of the Rings in proper thought is one. Well, it's one book. It's one whole story that. Oh, I can see it. It's up on a shelf over there. I can't
ah,
grab it. Actually, you know what? I am going to grab it because I want to show it off.
okay. Yeah. I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly that it was that I think J.R.R. Tolkien wrote it all as one book originally.
Yes.
And they
Well,
told him like, wait, we need this to be like separated up into like multiple like three books or something because it's like too big to
so
or something like
my
that.
understanding of it is so yeah, here's my copy of The Lord of the Rings. I got it at a used book sale for 75 cents. Um,
Nice.
and I've read through it a couple times with this copy and at least once other with another set. But so my understanding of the books is that I believe he published it initially, and I might be thinking of the hobby here, but I believe he published it initially in like installments. I'm pretty sure he did that with The Hobbit. And so he was publishing it in installments, and then they published it separately as three books. But it like if you go in, um, if I can find, like each book is like here's the Return of the King. The first section of the Return of the King is book 5.
Mm,
So each book is split up volume really is split up into two books. And
yeah.
so you could say it's 6 books, you could say it's 3 books, you could say it's one book. I like this copy because this is like his kind of original conception of it.
Right.
Um and yeah, depending on how you look at it, I tend to think of it as just one book. Like if somebody were to ask me, "What's your favorite book?" I would say, "Well, The Lord of the Rings is on that list." Like I wouldn't I wouldn't specify, well,
Yeah.
unless they asked me to, which is a great question. Which is your favorite one of the
Hmm. Yeah, I think yeah, that is a good question. I think it's man, I think the Fellowship of the Rings pretty up there.
I I mean, again, I like all of them. Fellowship's probably my least favorite of
Oh,
the three, if
really?
I'm being honest. Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it a lot more like going through it this last most recent time that I read it around Christmas. But I don't know. I really like I honestly think it might be Two Towers. Mostly because Theoden is like maybe my favorite character. But like really again, it's so hard to pick because the story flows together so well. And I think the Two Towers and Return of the King to me feel way more cohesive as like one long narrative than the Fellowship of the Ring does. Like honestly, when I think of the three parts of the Lord of the Rings, I honestly think of the Fellowship of the Ring and then the Frodo Sam story and the everybody else story. um
Hmm.
because it's like you could almost take the Frodo Sam story, the Frodo Sam chapters, and put them as a book, and then take the other chapters, that is everybody else, what they're doing, and put them together as one narrative because it flows like I think if you actually break down like in the timeline, I think the Fellowship is the majority of the time that the story takes place
Yeah.
because they're going well, I mean, ignoring the fact that the first chapter takes place over like 30 years or something. Um,
Yes.
uh, you have they one Gandalf shows up and is like, "Hey, you need to take this ring to Rivendell." Him and Sam set out. There's the whole conspiracy. Well, first of all, Gandalf says they need to leave. Then they wait like another few months while Frodo sets up this whole elaborate story of, "Oh, I'm just moving to Buckland or wherever it is that he's going." I think it is Buckland or to the Tux. He moves like right near the river, across the river,
Bill's
so it is Buckland.
back end.
Yeah, so he sells Bag End, which I guess they just give him back at the end after the scourging of the Shire, which I was, it's just like, they're just like, you deserve this more than we do. So then Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin are trudging through the forest. They see Tom Bombadil, which like people forget, like the movies don't just cut out Tom Bombadil. They cut out a whole lot between like the hobbits don't just leave the Shire and show up in Bree. They leave the Shire, get lost in the woods, meet Tom Bombadil, go through the barrows, get lost in the mist, get caught in the barrows, get rescued by Tom Bombadil again, get given these knives, which is way important because so in the movies, Eowyn kills the Witch King just by stabbing him in the face, and Mary kind of helps. And
Right.
Mary does stab him in the chin. But like in the books, it's implied that the only reason it works, it isn't just that like, oh, it's not a guy doing it. It's that like anybody could have killed him in this way. It was just a foretelling of who it would be. So in the books, the sword dagger that Mary stabs the Witch King with, is the sword he gets out of the barrow that was enchanted specifically to screw over the Witch King. Like it is specific Numenorian magic that is anti Witch King. So Mary stabs him in the ankle, and that undoes a bunch of spells and stuff on the Witch King that then allows Eowyn to kill the Witch King. So it's not just that, like, oh, I happen to be a woman and I can do this. It's like, oh, oh, shoot, all this is happening and I can signal it because oh, it's Eowyn. It's this woman. It's not. Anyways, so yeah, the Barrow White scene gets paid off way later in the books. And then they finally make it to Bree, and then there's stuff that happens in Bree as they're going to the prancing pony. So the movie cuts out all of this, and it kind of makes sense. But like, I would have loved to have seen it. So then they go to Rivendell, or then they meet Strider, Aragorn, and they're traveling through the forest for like days and days. And it's this like race that they're off the road so that the Nazgul can't find them. And then they get to Weathertop, and then there's this fight, and that only then do they rush because Frodo gets stabbed, and they're like, we gotta book it to Rivendell. And then Glorfindel shows up, which is not Arwen, which I like. I do like the change to Arwen in the movies for the movies. I like Glorfindel as a character better just because he's Glorfindel and he's really cool in the Silmarillion, and he also kills a Balrog and he's basically an honorary wizard. Um, but so all of that happens, and then Frodo's out for like 3 or 4 days, and then they have the Council of Elrond, and then they don't leave. This happens in like October or something, and then they don't leave Rivendell until Christmas. The day they set out is December 25th.
Right.
So that's a solid like few months. And then they have all the time that they're traveling from Rivendell down the Misty Mountains, down through like one of the sections that I think is in the movie and I forgot about in the books is they see the ruins of Celebrimbor's city, Eregion. They like pass by it and it's really
Okay.
sad. And then they take that road to the gates of Moria. Oh no, well, they eventually take that road to the gates of Moria. But they try to make it through the pass. They can't make it through the pass. They and then they go through Moria, and that takes them like
Mm-hmm.
3 or 4 days again.
Yeah.
And then they end up in Lothlorien, and then they spend a few days in Lothlorien, or like it's like 2 months or something. Which also, I'm pretty sure they leave Lothlorien like the day that Gandalf shows up in Lothlorien, just later, or like a few days later. So this is like months of time that passes, and then the rest of the book, there's not a time skip until the ring is destroyed. So yeah, so the Fellowship of the Ring takes. I think that's part of the reason why it's so slow is that it's just a lot of walking, and again, it's really good. It's got some of the best scenes, like the Moria sequence is great, but then once you get to Two Towers and Return of the King, I like them because I am a little bit of a sucker for just like adventure fantasy stuff, and there's a lot of that in the Two Towers and the Return of the King. So
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, I guess we could like pull out just a couple of things that I mean, you've already pulled out like the thing with Tom Bombadil and the swords and all is
yeah,
being different.
yeah.
Another thing I can think of is they don't. It could have happened, but they don't mention Gandalf going to Weathertop.
They don't mention Gandalf
Um,
going to. I mean, they also, if we're talking about things that are left out of the movies, Fatty Bolger is like kind of really important. Well, first
oh
of all,
yes,
so
yeah. There are
he's
yes.
he's like the fifth Hobbit that was like part of their little friend group and part of their like he's part of the conspiracy that they have where it's like Sam, Mary, Pippin, and Fatty Bolger who are like something's going on with Frodo and we're gonna figure out what it is. And he really seems like he is leaving. And so Fatty Bolger, he's also the one that raises the alarm when the Nazgul show up at whatever the place that he is. I forget what name they have for
Yeah,
the
he,
house, but he he sounds the alarm, which delays the Nazgul, and he does this like really brave act to like stall the Nazgul and allow Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin to get out of the Shire. And so he's like super important in the books, even though he only shows up for like a few chapters and then again a few chapters at the end of the Scourging of the Shire. And so, and he's just not in the books at all. And it's like, he was such an important character because if he had failed in his quest, the whole thing would have been off. They would have gotten the ring, and then everyone would have been kind of screwed. So,
Yeah.
um,
It's just his character too. Isn't he like just him like standing up against the ring race? Like what you say is kind of unique. Like then he kind of ward them off,
yeah, I
or is
mean,
that another character?
I know, well, several of the hobbits ward them off, and it's kind of implied that like hobbits have this great ability to just not give a darn about these massively powerful supernatural beings. Like even even with Gandalf, they're just like like his fireworks are cool, but he always causes so many problems. Um, and then it's like Farmer Maggot, who again is that his name? Is it Farmer Maggot?
Yeah, he's. I mean, he is.
Yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
is one of the actual.
Yeah, I know. I'm just thinking Maggot's not a very nice name, but now that I'm thinking about it, it is him.
Yeah.
Who's it's not Farmer Maggot. It's Farmer Cotton, isn't it? Because it's Rosie's dad, isn't it? I'm gonna look it up.
I
If I
thought.
just called Rosie's father Farmer Maggot, I'm gonna be very sad. And
No,
that's not his
see,
name.
Farmer Maggot, from what I remember in the Fellowship of the Ring, actually took in all the
Yeah.
hobbits
Okay. Yeah. So we are thinking of the same character.
instead of
So
like chasing them with a pitchfork
yeah,
or with
it
a
is Farmer
scythe or
Maggot.
whatever.
I was just
Yeah,
like, is that his name? Anyways, so Farmer Maggot, he they show up. One, they show up to they ask the gaffer questions, and the gaffer's like, I don't know. Go ask an Hobbiton. Then Farmer Maggot basically also tells them to go screw off back to Mordor or wherever they come from. He doesn't know Mordor. And so, like, all these hobbits are just confronted with these massively powerful beings, and they just have no conception of how outclassed they are. And so, like, outclassed. And so they
right.
just tell them, like, go away. I don't want to deal with this today. And it keeps working. And I love hobbits. They're the best. And so, and then Fatty Bulger does it as well. Well, Fatty Bulger's kind of terrified because they're Nazgul. The older hobbits just take no crap, and it's fantastic. Even Lullabella, the Saxful Baggins like grandmother at the in the Scourging of the Shire, just marches up the Bag End to give Sharky a talking to, and it's Saruman, and it's just like, and then she comes out like weakened but still defiant. The older hobbits are all just the best people.
Yeah,
Anyways, yeah, but yeah, Fatty Bulger is a really important character that they cut from the movies. I mean, again, we already talked about Tom Bombadil, but like, and I gotta say, if I was making a Lord of the Rings movie, I think I would also cut Tom Bombadil because as important as yeah, as important a character as he is, and how much he kind of represents the transition from the hobbits into the wider world, and he does all this stuff, and then nobody's sure like why does the ring just have no effect on him. As wild and important to the story as that is, and then like Gandalf at the end is like, I'm gonna go talk to Tom Bombadil for 3 years.
yeah,
It does drastically shift the tone for the few chapters that he shows up, and I think in a really narratively interesting way for a book this long. But even in the extended editions of The Lord of the Rings, you don't have time for the hobbits to meet a whimsical magic man who lives in the woods and is married to a nature spirit and is la di da happy go lucky and also maybe the most powerful entity in Middle Earth secretly. And then, like, I mean, my favorite, there's so many theories about who this guy is. My favorite theory is just not even theory. I think it's just, who is Tom Bombadil? Tom Bombadil is Tom Bombadil. He's just there. I think the theory that makes the most sense as to, like, if you want to classify him is that he's essentially the same kind of being as, and this is going to sound really weird, but like the Watcher in the water and the nameless things that gnaw the bones of the earth. He's just an entity who's been in Middle Earth forever and doesn't really care about what goes on. Has like, and like again, like he's one of the most fascinating characters because he is on the surface level like, oh, he's just a happy-go-lucky forest man, and he's very nice and fun. And then the whole thing with the ring happens, and then the whole thing with the barrel whites happened. And I also like love this concept of I am a nigh undefeatable, omnipotent being within the bounds I have set for myself. Like the idea of like I will, like if something comes to attack me, I will utterly destroy it and utterly overwhelm it right up until the border, and then I will stand there and not let them back in. And I love that idea for a character. And then you put it in the body of Tom Bombadil, who's a happy-go-lucky guy. Who, if you don't know, the real world story of Tom Bombadil is that Tom Bombadil was a doll that Tolkien's kids had, and he made stories about him and wrote a whole book called like The Tale of Tom Bombadil that's just a bunch of funny poems, and then decided I think this incredibly powerful spirit of whimsy needs to exist in the Lord of the Rings. So yeah, so Tom Bombadil is just like, I think there's all sorts of theories like, is he the embodiment of the music of the Ainur, which I kind of like, but I again I don't think it's true. He's just like, again, and I think part of the reason that Tolkien I'm sure had an answer to all these questions, and I think he may have even explicitly said in a letter somewhere that he's not going to explain Tom Bombadil, purely because this kind of conversation would never happen if we knew the answer to who Tom Bombadil was.
Yeah.
So yeah, Tom Bombadil is an important character. You also have kind of shifting tones. You have I mean, I guess the next place to go is the Barrow Whites, which it's like you look at what the Barrow Whites actually are, and they're like the descendants of Numenor. So like they're not the kings of Arnor. They are the kings of Cardolan, which is a, so Arnor splits into three kingdoms, and you have Arthedain, you have Cardolan, and you have Rhudaur. And Rhudaur eventually gets taken over by and allies with Angmar of Witch King fame, and then Cardolan and Arthedain eventually like kind of reunify. And Arthedain is the line that the kings of Arnor stay through. So Aragorn's ancestors were the kings of Arthedain, and then like eventually right before the line of kings kind of stops being kings, Cardolan and Arthedain reunify as Arnor. But the princes of Cardolan oppose the Witch King, and then the Witch King sends the Barrow Wight to haunt their graves after he destroys them, basically as a safeguard against all these patented anti-Witch King weapons that we have lying in this tomb for any, 2 foot tall adventurers to stumble across and start using. So, like, again, just the depth of history that this world has. Like, even so, Weathertop is another one that in the movies it's like, huh, that's a cool ruin that would exist in a fantasy land, I'm sure. But it was a tower that held a palantir, and it's right at the border of all three kingdoms, and they're constantly fighting over it. So the reason that it's so important is because not only is it a physical watchtower, it is a metaphysical watchtower where they have a palantir, and it's that power that is incredibly valuable. So the fact that the Nazgul all show up there, like the Witch King, it's not just a like, oh, this is a dramatic spot. It's like this is deeply tied to the history of the North and of Numenor and all this stuff.
Yeah. So I figured we just go into some worldview stuff. So I think that some like kind of key things that I've kind of looked into some stuff and people's opinions, kind of figured to be like some points on worldview in Middle Earth coming from Tolkien would be
Yeah.
things like good versus evil, universal morality, people struggling with, doing the right thing slash, being, struggling with that, like, I guess, in a sense, internally evil, I guess, and that problem. And then the
Yeah.
sovereign hand in things. And so I guess one thing I think that, like, for this, I don't think there's really much to say, like, a ton against, like, Jackson's movies. I think he did a lot of
Yeah.
that stuff really well.
Yeah.
But
No, I agree. Again, like I think it's yeah, like a lot of these principles, like you can't take it out of the story, and you can't take it out of the story and have it still be the Lord of the Rings. I will say, I think the biggest, especially in terms of like morality and a character like that, the biggest difference you have is Boromir. So in the books, Boromir is like unabashedly a good guy. Like, and you get some of this in the movies later when you kind of see him through Faramir's eyes, but like he is that guy. He is this hero from the South who has shown up. He's the only one of them, other than like Gandalf and Aragorn, really, who truly understands the threat that is going on of the members of the Fellowship. Like, I think Gandalf and Aragorn actually have a better understanding of it than he does, but he's the one who's been fighting it directly for basically his entire life. So, and again, these ideas are not entirely my own. I wish I could credit them, but I've seen so many like analyses and videos and things that I cannot remember where this idea originates from. Well, it originates from Tolkien, but the idea that in the movies, Boromir is always like, oh, I kind of like, he's always like, I kind of want this ring. But in the books, he's kind of this example of he is the stereotypical fantasy hero. He is like a paragon of virtue and bravery and all this stuff. And it's just the ring will corrupt even the best. The ring, like the whole time, he's thinking, but we could take the ring and we could use it. And it's just kind of gnawing at him the entire time until eventually, briefly, he snaps and tries to take the ring. And then, as soon as Frodo gets away, he immediately is like, oh my gosh, what have I done? And so I think, yeah, and then
interesting.
okay, so there are things I like about the book adaptation of Boromir more than the movie one. I will say I think Boromir's death scene in the movies is way better than in the books because I believe in the books you just come across him and it's like, oh, Boromir's full of arrows. This is very sad. And then he dies. And he like tells Aragorn kind of what happened and then he dies. But then in the movies, you get to see the last fight and it's like heart wrenching, but also it's so cool because Boromir's like, I've failed, but I'm not gonna fail again. Two, the whole exchange with Aragorn is just like, oh my gosh, it's so good.
Yeah.
I like it's one of those things where it's like you've seen and he really like in that version of him, he really like epitomizes, I think, Gondor as a people, where it's like they are the noble descendants of the Numenorians, but they are less than what they have been. But in that moment, in the like my what's the exact quote? He's just like my something my brother, my king. Um
Yes.
it's like you realize like they were really good. They have fallen from grace, but they aren't lost yet. And it's just like, anyways, yeah, the whole actual death scene with Boromir is just perfect. I love that scene so much in the
Yeah.
movies. So it's like his arc in the books is better, but the end of the arc in the movies is just, it's so good.
It's a really good one to bring up. I was listening to I've been I listened to like this it's like this scholarly like lecture actually on Lord of the Rings, which is kind of cool. I had bought
Yeah.
it a ways back and the guy was talking about that either Boromir specifically or something else that he said that Jackson had done that Tolkien like couldn't do with the book that Jackson could do with the movie. And he might have been referring to that or he might have just been referring to something else.
Yeah.
I can't
Well,
remember, but yeah.
I think that um and again, I think some people kind of use this as a pot shot against Lord of the Rings, which I disagree with. The books, which I disagree with, is that it's really not a character driven story in a lot of ways. Like it is a story written in the like epic hero cycle tradition. Like Aragorn in the books, Aragorn never has any doubts that he's going to be king. He he goes forth like, "Oh, it's time. I'm going to go do my king thing." Um, he does not have this like moment of uncertainty. Like again, there are bits and pieces of it. He especially like when he's leading the fellowship from between Lothlorien and the breaking of the fellowship, he does have this like, I'm not the best guy for this. Why did Gandalf have to die? But overall, like Aragorn, very sure of him, like confident and knows what he's doing and always shows up and is like, I'm the guy I'm the guy who's here to save the day. Although he doesn't save the day at the end. Well, Gollum does actually, of all people. But and we've talked about this before. The movies are more character driven. So sometimes I think that's a good thing. Like with Boromir, I think that that last moment with Boromir is very character driven and is a little bit better in the books or in the movies than it is the books. Um, I don't like Aragorn's arc as much in the movies because they kind of make him out to be less than what he is at first and then bring him up to what he is. It does culminate in the speech at the Black Gate that's not in the books and is like one of the few things from the movies where it's like I think this is book worthy. Like I think this moment rises to the occasion of it is worthy to be put alongside the books.
Mm.
And like because you have that moment where he gives this rousing speech and then you see all of Mordor arrayed against his tiny little army and for that split second you're like, oh, is he gonna break? And then he's just like, for Frodo, and then everybody starts screaming and running and slicing and it's incredible.
Yes.
But
Which is
but the
different, but that could
yeah
be
but
for
like
another time, yeah.
the book, like that speech is really good. Another one that I'm not a huge fan of is how is Faramir's character arc in the movies versus the books. Because in the books, he is 100% in the right basically the entire time he's on page. Like, I'm pretty sure Tolkien has said that Faramir is like, had said at some point that Faramir was one of, if not his favorite character.
Hmm.
Um, Faramir, he also like did not initially write Faramir as a character. He he at some point I think he says like Faramir is a character that just I discovered in the story. I did not set out to create Boromir's brother, but he just showed up and I was like, "Oh, this guy's the best." um, so
That's crazy.
Faramir.
Why would that be like the like the way you'd be like going about things, you know? It's just
Well, I
interesting.
mean, like there's different ways of writing a story. Like some people have basically the entire story. I mean, I think most people usually have some combination of the whole story is planned. Like I think like obviously he always knew that the ring would get destroyed and that the good guys would win and all of this. But I actually um again, George R. R. Martin is an author I have mixed feelings on. But really good world builder though. I will just throw it aside. But he's talked about how he writes like a gardener where he kind of cultivates and he does stuff, but he kind of lets the story grow on its own in a way. And I think that's kind of what happened to Tolkien with Faramir. And so, and I know you talk to different authors and they will tell you, like, sometimes I want to do something, but the story's just like, nope, this has to happen. This is going to happen. So, like, there is a back and forth because, like, yes, at the end of the day, you are the author. But also, like, sometimes you'll think, like, oh, this is where I want the story to go. And then as you're writing, you'll realize, wait a second, if I do this, it's going to be way better. And this is how the story is supposed to go. And that's kind of what happened, in my understanding, to Tolkien when he was writing about these rangers in Ithilien. And he's like, oh, there's this one ranger leader, and oh, this is Boromir's brother. And now I have someone to play off of Boromir. And so in the books, again, like I said, Faramir is basically 100% right every time he speaks, and like he is never tempted by the ring. As soon as he figures out what it is and knows kind of what happened to Boromir because of it, he's just like, nope, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. I will help you do whatever you need to do to go off on your quest and destroy it, but just please get it away from me because I know that if I give in just a little bit, I'm going to take it, I'm going to come back, I'm going to be the hero, and then everything is going to go wrong. And so in the movies, they play him off of Boromir in a different way, where Boromir tried to take the ring and then died, and like it was this kind of sinister thing, and then they kind of try to play Faramir as like, oh, is he gonna be Boromir part two? And then oh no, he's actually good and makes the right decision. But in the books, there's never any question, is Faramir gonna make the right decision, because Faramir is one of those people that the ring just has no hold on, basically. He's similar to Samwise in that Samwise, like, again, this is something that I probably saw in like a green text or a meme or something, like a Tumblr analysis or something like that, where basically Samwise is the ring cannot conceive of someone like Samwise who doesn't want to be the greatest in the world at whatever. He just wants his garden and a family and to have a quiet little life, and that's all he needs. He has no grand ambitions. He has no desire to exceed his station. And Faramir is a similar person in that he fully understands his place in the world. He fully understands what he needs to do, and he fully understands that the ring, anything the ring offers him, is something he's not interested in. And so yeah, so there's these characters, and so again, that's one of the things that some of the in making the story more character driven and more like the characters are a little bit more complex, some of them, there are things you gain, there are things you lose. And I think, again, I think that's why even like with Tom Bombadil, you can't do that because they would have had to have changed Tom Bombadil to be more complex than he is. And while there's a lot of depth to Tom Bombadil, he's a very simple character on the face of it. He is a happy man who lives in the woods, who loves his wife, and is weirdly powerful. Um, and so that doesn't really jive with the way that Peter Jackson wanted to make the movie. And so it's one of those things where it's like there's a lot of people out there who are like, I don't really like the Lord of the Rings movies because they don't they change the way the story works, essentially. And I think that's a fair criticism. I disagree with the analysis that that makes the movies bad. Like I think they are actually a very good adaptation of the Lord of the Rings books because I don't think they would have been as good as movies if they hadn't made some of these changes. If they had just made Because like in a book, you can have hundreds of characters who just kind of show up, do something cool to help the story move along, and then disappear. Like, what does Erkenbrand shows up and saves the day at Helm's Deep, and then they all go on their merry way. But that doesn't make any sense in the movies. We don't know who Erkenbrand is, so they made it Éomer, because Éomer is a character that we've heard a lot about, we've met. It's less interesting if he's just at the battle, which, side note, Tolkien actually said that if they were going to make a movie of the Two Towers, they could cut the Battle of Helm's Deep. Um, which is also something that, like, I went on my last read through Lord of the Rings. Like, in the movies, that's the culmination of the Two Towers, is the Battle of Helm's Deep. It happens a quarter of the way through the Two Towers. Like, it is not even the end, the culmination of the like of book 3, which is the first half of the Two Towers. The culmination of book 3 is them going to Isengard and finding out about um the Ents. So yeah, Tolkien was like, yeah, you can just skip the Battle of Helm's Deep. That doesn't need to be in the story. And also, like, it's another thing where, like, in the movies, it's like we have to run to Helm's Deep to save our lives, and in the books, it's like, oh, they're gonna attack Helm's Deep next. Yeah, we can make a detour to stop and help. Like, but yeah, so Erkenbrand showing up that's a character that, like, why would he be in the movies? Again, Glorfindel. I love Glorfindel. He's probably the coolest elf in the Lord of the Rings. Um,
Yeah.
but he's replaced by Arwen in the movies because Arwen doesn't really do much in the books. And they are making this more character driven. And so they're like, why don't we have Arwen show up? You can have a little moment between Arwen and Aragorn where they're like, oh my goodness, it's the person I love. But we're also in a tense situation. And then have Arwen, you get to show Arwen being really cool and powerful. Um, and so there's these moments where they take characters and they change their arcs a little bit to be more involved in the story than they really are. And so, and I think that was a good call for the movies because of the way they were telling the story. You can't just have these random one-off characters show up and be like, ha, I'm here for 10 minutes. But that's what happens in an epic poem where it's like, oh yes, and then so and so showed up with his army and saved the day, and then our heroes were saved and got to go on to their next adventure. Whereas this is like the Lord of the Rings, the books is an epic. The Lord of the Rings, the movies are almost more of a novel than the novel is because it's more like a modern version of how it would have been told today by somebody trying to write a modern book. And I think, and I'm glad the book's not like that because I think if he'd written it like, well, first of all, he it would not have been written because a lot of those sort of modern fantasy novels only exist because the Lord of the Rings. Um, like modern fantasy is everyone just trying to copy Tolkien in on a certain level. Like, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I love the Lord of the Rings and I love fantasy. I have a bookshelf this wide, you can't even see it, of D&D books that are just a lot of D&D is just shamelessly ripping off J.R.R. Tolkien to the extent that the first edition of Dungeons and Dragons got sued because they were using terms like Hobbit and Balrog. Um,
I remember hearing
so
about that.
yeah, no. So yeah, you've got halflings instead of hobbits. You have Baelors instead of Balrogs. You have Treants instead of Ents, because the Tolkien estate was like, you cannot be using our words. So I love that aesthetic and I love those books. But a lot of modern fantasy novels, I think the reason they're not quite as popular is because they're essentially just a modern way of telling a story with a fantasy texture over it. And so, um, and again, some of those are really good, but they're not they're not classics. Like I just started rereading the Ranger's Apprentice books, which were like some of my favorite books as a kid. And I hope they're continued to be read, but they will never be household names like The Lord of the Rings, because in a certain extent, they exist in a tradition that was created by this book. So,
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, man. Yeah. So I think maybe like one more thing
yeah,
to touch on. I think it's interesting to think about is in general in like Lord of the Rings. I mean, as we were talking about earlier, it's you can't really separate all these books, the Lord of the Rings trilogy apart,
yeah,
and talk about them separately necessarily,
yeah,
because something like you can say definitely that there's like a sovereign hand at work in the story, especially when you get to like Gollum falling
yeah.
into Mount Doom. But if you try to do that for like the Fellowship of the Ring, it's like, well, I mean, I don't know. Like, I guess
I
there might be some instances, but it's a little harder to pull them out of there.
I mean, yes and no. You have things like Strider happening to be at the Prancing Pony at this time. You have things like the elves in the Shire helping Frodo and Sam that one night, and that ends up helping them. You have all of these sorts of, I mean, come on, the biggest one is Gandalf gets returned from the dead. um, he gets returned to Middle Earth. Not really the dead because he's a Maiar, but he you have Gandalf coming back in a way that's kind of implied that it's not the Valar sending him back. It's Ilúvatar being like, "You're not done yet." Um, so again, you don't find out about that until the Two Towers. But again, like I think like one of my favorite like one of the things is people are like, what would have happened if Sauron got the ring? Sauron would never get the ring because then you wouldn't have the Lord of the Rings. And so, but as in universe, it's like Tolkien's world is not structured in such a way that Sauron gets the ring, because Sauron is evil and he is a corrupting and corrupted entity. And the music of the Ainur is woven with the discordant streams of Melkor, but in the end, it is Ilúvatar's song. And so,
Hmm.
um, so you have things like the, the Nazgul not finding them on the roadside, or, you know, Glorfindel just making it in time to get Frodo across the river. All these sorts of things where it's not, um, yeah, like I think Tolkien's view of the world is essentially that there is a sovereign hand guiding events, but you're not going to see the sovereign hand. And so in The Lord of the Rings, it's like there's all these things that happen because Ilúvatar is guiding them, but you're never going to have, Ilúvatar showing up and smacking Sauron in the face. Like, even like if you want to look at it, like you've got Ilúvatar who is guiding the Valar. And the Valar send Gandalf, and the other is Starry. So that's like three levels of my power. I'm sending an emissary, but it's still coming from him. So again, like it's hard to talk about direct instances of the sovereign hand at play, because it's so subtle that it's just the events of the story happening in the way that they do that is the sovereign hand guiding. And again, like you brought up, I think the strongest instance of direct involvement in the text of the Lord of the Rings is, and it's even then, it's like you can read it in a way where it just is chance, is at the crack of Mount Doom, where, Frodo fails. He doesn't fail because Tolkien has basically said no one would succeed at the crack of doom. Um, Frodo decides to claim the ring. Gollum decides he's not okay with that, and it's Gollum being there and getting the ring and then slipping is the most direct instance of divine intervention you get in the text of the Lord of the Rings. Now, there's more in the story. Numenor, the fall of Numenor is explicitly stated to be Ilúvatar going, nope,
Yeah.
you don't get to do that. You now get to be stuck under the ocean for the next thousand to several thousand years. Like, I think that's one of the few instances where it's directly stated. It's like it's not the Valar putting a stop to this. It is Ilúvatar directly going, no, you've messed up. We're doing this, and he changes the world, which I always loved that that's Tolkien's explanation for why the world is round now. It's that they were sailing to the undying lands. He's just like, nope, we're going like this now, and you're getting trapped under the ocean. So, yeah. So again, it's very hard to point to exact instances of divine intervention because I don't think it's really Tolkien's style to be like, ah, yes, and then Ilúvatar was like, I'm gonna send, the eagles to rescue Gandalf. I know that was Radagast, but it's a
Yeah.
much more subtle because I think that reflects Tolkien's worldview, and the worldview that I hold, and I assume you hold, is that God is working
Uh,
in the world, but he's never like he's not gonna smite people. Like it's it's this sort of I was gonna say if we can get a little theological here, I was actually reading a really interesting book recently about like Western assumptions in reading scripture, and it was talking about the whole idea of all things working together for the good of like all things basically all things work together for those who love him, and this is like, well, the assumption, like the way it's phrased, we assume it means all things are going to work together for my personal good, and it's kind of that's not necessarily what it meant all things will work together for the good of God's people, for the good of the church. And so even when things are going really terribly for me, it's like and I think it is true, like it's a very Western individualist way of looking at the world. We're like, ah, yes, I'm the most important person in this story, so all things got to work together for me. But and so it's I think it's that same kind of vibe is what Tolkien is getting at. Because I mean, like even in Gollum's story, it's like you can make the argument that in his final moments, Gollum is incredibly happy because he has the ring, but also he's burning to death in lava. I don't think that's working for Gollum's good. Let's be honest. Like even just possessing the ring is not good for Gollum. And so, but it is good for literally everyone else in Middle-earth. um and so it's that you're taking the individual out of it. And so that's sort of I think the way that the sovereign hand of Ilúvatar is at play in Middle-earth is subtle nudges, small things, you know, like even like if they, I mean, I guess they would have gone to Lothlorien anyways with Gandalf, but going through, like, going through Moria, which is, first of all, another thing is that's where Gollum was. Gollum was in Moria, and he picks up their trail in Moria. So if they hadn't gone through Moria, I'm just putting this together now. If they hadn't gone through Moria, Gollum never would have gotten on their trail, or if he did, he would have been way behind them. And he never would have met Frodo and Sam. And then when they get to the Cracks of Doom, Frodo would have claimed the ring, and either the ring would have returned to Sauron, or Sam would have had to have pushed Frodo in, and he couldn't because he'd be invisible. So literally, the fact that, again, I know in the movies it's Saruman adjusting the weather and preventing them from going through. I think in the books it's just bad weather. Like it's the malevolence of the mountain, which, could be an aspect of Illuvatar change causing the weather to change. So they're using like that. Now that I'm thinking about it, I think the fact that they have to go through Moria, and even though that's where they lose Gandalf, like, okay, yeah, now that I'm thinking about it, this is the most direct, at least in the Fellowship, but at the very least in the Fellowship. But like, if you think about it, if they don't go through Moria, Gandalf never falls, so he never becomes Gandalf the White. So you don't have the this mustering of the armies of men and this like final battle at Pelennor Fields or at Helm's Deep or any of that. None of that happens. Saruman doesn't get defrocked essentially by Gandalf. Gollum never catches up with them. The ring never gets destroyed. And so it's only because they go through the Mines of Moria that any of their success basically happens. So, again, random chance, good storytelling, the sign of a sovereign creator nudging things along for the good of the world. So yeah, I'm gonna go with, if you need an instance of divine intervention if you want to point to divine intervention in the Fellowship of the Ring, it's the storm on Carathras, where they cannot get through, and so they have to go through Moria.
Yeah.
And we get to hear Gimli singing a dope song. So
Oh man. Yeah. Well, thanks, Matt, and thanks everybody for tuning in, and catch us for our next episode next week. Thanks for visiting the White City. Before you leave, please subscribe to our podcast and check us out at thewhitecitypodcast.com. We're on YouTube or Facebook under the tag @The White City Podcast.